kick off the webinar, but before doing that, I would like to first of all thank you all for joining and give you some information on the Zoom tool that we are using, so that you can get more familiar and that you can ask questions, etc. So you are all muted by default, so we cannot hear you if you talk. But this doesn't mean that you cannot ask questions or you cannot intervene in the webinar. On the contrary, we want this webinar to be as much participatory as possible. Therefore, you can ask your questions whenever you want using the button below the screen. You see Q&A. So if you click on Q&A, you are able to ask your questions and we will see your questions. If you want to speak, so live, you can always raise your hand. So there is another button which says raise your hand. You can click on that and I will see an icon on my screen appearing, and then I will know that you have a compelling message to share, that you want to intervene, and so I can allow you to talk. So what else? Then there is the chat. Some of you are already using the chat. From Italy, I see Tamas from Hungary that is using the chat. So that with that function, you can always share your comments and to all attendees, or also to the host, so to me and Rosien. What else? You can make the windows bigger. At the top right of your screen, you see a button, and if you click, you can enter full screen so that you can see Rosien, myself, and the presentation bigger. And just for information, this webinar is recorded to give the opportunity to the awardees who cannot make it today to listen to the webinar in the future when they have time. Okay, so having said that, I think we can kick off with the webinar, and I leave Rosien introducing the agenda for today, the topic, and the presentation. Rosien.
Thank you, Luisa. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. Today we're going to talk about theory of change. So as part of as the basis of the quality framework, we will be working with the concept of theory of change. And we are actually hoping that you are to encourage you to develop a theory of change. And that is the reason that we want to have this webinar. I have to see how I can switch the slides because I'm looking at this slide and it doesn't work. Hang on.
You can also just use the keyboard with the arrows to go.
Yeah. It doesn't.
It doesn't work. Okay.
No.
Otherwise, you can exit the full screen and then.
Okay. Not leave meeting.
So you can push you can click on
exit.
escape. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So I have to go to no.
Then you can change the slides. You can just go below on the left side. Yeah. Yes.
All right. Sorry about that. So this is the objective of the webinar, to trigger your interest and to help you understand the basics of a theory of change. We will look at how to develop a theory of change and how you can use a theory of change in project planning, monitoring, and evaluation. Let's start with the basics. This is not working very well for me. Hang on.
It's strange you cannot change the slides, Rosien.
Yeah, no, let me check one more thing. Yeah, now it works.
Yes.
There you go. All right. So the first question obviously is, what is a theory of change? To be honest, there are several definitions going around, so we are presenting you with one that we think is the most accepted and workable. It is a description of the desired change that you wish to make as an organization. And it also describes, in very general terms, how you expect to achieve that change. So it's about what change you want to promote and how you want to do it. It is not something static. It can be changed over time as your environment changes and as you are learning also, and internally you are changing. No, it stopped again. Sorry. Why is this?
That's strange.
Yeah.
Because it worked before.
Yeah, it did. So I've got all these things on my screen. Sorry about that, guys. Why would you develop a theory of change? In practice, we find that a theory of change, having a theory of change, helps you and supports your work. It helps you in planning, but it also helps you if you want to communicate your work to others. It's very important if you want to monitor and evaluate your work. And also, as many of you are probably collecting all kinds of data on what you're doing, having a theory of change as a framework also helps you to learn from that. So in this presentation and in working on a theory of change, we use all this jargon or language, and it's important to be clear about that. So I want to walk you through some of the most important terminology that we are using. First of all, I already used the word monitoring. Monitoring is basically checking the progress of what you're doing against certain indicators. Monitoring is something that you do regularly. Evaluation, on the other hand, is sometimes is not done very frequently. You may do that, at the end of a big program or somewhere midway, but it's definitely not something that you do on a monthly basis. Indicators. Indicators are targets or criteria. They can be numerical, but they can also be qualitative. Outputs is a term that we will be using. Outputs are something very tangible. It can be a website, an article, a workshop, a toolkit, a video, an event. All those are outputs. Outcomes, on the other hand, are often much less tangible. Those are results, but they're changes in what people do, or changes in the policies that govern what people do. And then impact, we use that term when we talk about the changes in the people's lives that occur, as a result, in our case, of a program or a project. Other important terms: constituents, that's the group on whose behalf you are working. And then partners, those are the actors with whom you work to make the change. That can also obviously include the constituents. Accountability is another important term. Accountability is about taking responsibility for your actions. And it is also about reporting about what you do to the concerned actors. A lot of people compare theories of change with a logic model. We can talk about that difference a bit more, but a theory of change in general is a very global statement, and a logic model is a very detailed account of inputs, outputs, activities, outcomes, and impacts. Let's go to the next slide. Yes, I want to pause here to see if there is questions. You can ask your questions in the chat or the Q&A, or you can raise your hand.
Yeah. Is there any questions at this stage? Of course, you will have the opportunity to ask questions also during the webinar and the next session. But if you want to clarify something now, please go ahead. I do have a question. Maybe we can. Yeah, I can ask a question, Rosien, if you allow me.
Of course, of course.
Because maybe it's a bit confusing, or at least if you're not very familiar with monitoring and evaluation, I tend to confuse somehow the terms results, outputs, outcomes. What's the difference in more concrete terms?
Yeah. The way we use it, results, is a very general term. And we use outputs for things that are very tangible, that you can count, that you can measure, touch. But outcomes are often very important, because that is what we that we want to produce with these outputs. For example, if you organize a training event, then one event with 15 participants describes an output. But when you then ask with people, 3 months afterwards, and they tell you that they learned something, for example, from participating in this webinar, they started doing working with their colleagues on developing a theory of change, then we say that is the outcome. So people working with their colleagues to develop a theory of change is the outcome of the webinar, which is the output.
Okay, thank you.
Shall we move on?
Yes, I have a couple of more questions in the meantime.
Okay, good, very good.
So I can read them all, and then Rosien, you can answer. So,
wonderful.
Yeah. So they're asking, can you give us an example of a logic model? Another attendee asks if they're already using logical frameworks, what's the benefit of using a theory of change process?
Yeah.
You can see also these questions in the chat. And Gabrielle from Germany asks, what are the names or the authors or the larger theories behind the theory of change that you are using?
Yeah.
That question is open in the question and answer box.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Maybe you can answer these questions and then we can move on with the rest of the presentation.
Yeah. Just giving off the top of my head an example of a logic model isn't that easy, because logic models tend to be very complicated and very detailed, which also explains the difference between logical frameworks, logic models, and theories of change. The theory of change tends to be much more a global statement and a much more flexible, which is why people started using it. The use of logical frameworks, at least in International Development Cooperation, for example, that dates back like 30 years. But one of the downsides of logical frameworks is that they tend to be very static. They fix your project in time for a period, which is why people started thinking in terms of theories of change. And also, the biggest difference between a logical framework and theory of change is the concept of outcomes. So most logical frameworks go directly from activities to inputs, activities, outputs, and objectives. And we stress this intermediate series of steps, which is outcomes, behavior changes among people. I can send links to where we get our resources from, which is easier, but a lot of them you will find on a website called Better Evaluation. But I will make sure that you get, all the participants get some links to some of the background information. It's not that we use it from one specific author. What we will present in the rest of the webinar is basically something that we have been using with other similar actors. For example, in work that we did with EPIM awardees, which is a program that Luisa knows, European organizations working on migration issues. If you have a logic model or a logical framework, your theory of change should be basically implicit in it, and it will be extremely easy to dig it up, as you can see from the presentation. It may be a bit more global, but that also depends on how your logical framework looks like. Shall I move on, Luisa?
Yes, I think you can move on. Yeah, there are no more questions. Thank you.
Oh, right, I have to exit again. What is going on here? All right. So, developing the theory of change.
And of course, if you have other questions or if you want clarification on Rosien's answers, then we can go back to these questions at the end of the webinar.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So your theory of change, why would you be doing it? You can do it for your own project planning. You can use it for monitoring and evaluation, and you can use it for communication. The basic ingredients would be the same for all these, but how you present it, how it will look, may differ a little bit depending on how you want to use it. Which is why most organizations have one theory of change, but several versions of it, depending on its use. If you start developing a theory of change, or revising it, or it's very important to think about who should be involved. It can be very useful to be inclusive. At the same time, it's not something you do in a mass meeting. So you have to find a way in which you can involve other people. It's also important to reflect on where you are. Are you at the beginning of a certain idea, implementing a certain idea, or are you right in the middle, or are you looking back? Because the process will be a little bit different. If you have already been implementing your work for some time, you will be looking at in developing your theory of change. It's basically uncovering what is the theory behind what you're doing. If you're entering a new field, you will have to develop a theory from scratch. How am I going to address this? The questions you ask are basically in 5 categories. The what, where, how, who, and why. What is the change that you wish to achieve? What is the overall outcomes and the intermediate outcomes? Where do you want to work? And at which level do you want to make the change? Individual, organizational, or system changes? And then the important question, how? What will you do to make this change happen? Who is involved? And then the why, which is what connects all these elements in the first 4 questions. Why is it what you will do, with whom you do it, and where you do it leads to what you want to achieve? So normally we work from left to right. You start in writing down a statement that articulates your overall objectives. Working on dementia inclusive spaces, for example, you could state that your objective is a community in which people living with dementia are included in all aspects of community living. But you may, your goals may be different. That just depends on what you are, what your organization or what your program is doing. This looks, what normally looks at the positive changes that you want to achieve. Eventually, you may also consider the potential negative aspects of what you are doing. But initially, obviously, we want to focus on the positive impacts that we want to achieve. So where are you working? And at what level? It's very important to distinguish here whether the changes that you want to achieve are at individual level or at organizational level or at system level. And sometimes you may seek to see change happen at all these levels, but it's important to be clear about that. If you have clear what you're working towards and where that change will happen, then you list the activities that you will put in place or that you have put in place. If you're reconstructing your theory of change from what you're doing, you compare what you are doing with what you're trying to achieve. It's very important to define the behavior changes that you're hoping to see and who needs to change their behaviors with your activities. It's a matter of connecting the what with what you are doing, the what you want to achieve with what you're doing. And sometimes what we want to achieve, we don't achieve by directly influencing behaviors of the people concerned, but indirectly. For example, we want people living with dementia and their caregivers to more easily reach out to government or officials who provide information. So we are working with the officials and the providers of information to change their behaviors, so it's to make it easier for people living with dementia to connect with them and to reach out. So you're trying to influence what people living with dementia and what their caregivers are doing by influencing the behaviors of other people. It's very important, again, to be aware and to be specific what in your theory of change, what it is that you want to achieve through whom. And then obviously behind every activity you undertake with your partners, there are assumptions. You think that by doing X, that will lead to Y, but you have to be explicit about those assumptions because that's the only way that you can, in the end, test them. And if you find that your assumptions are proven wrong, then you can review your TOC and you can review your reorient your activities. we do a lot of work. Our NGOs are used to doing an enormous amount of work, but we are very often we are too busy to actually test our assumptions. So that's an important part of developing your theory of change, and it exposes you also in the sense that if you make your assumptions explicit, people can say, "Oh, but you know that's wrong." But that shouldn't deter you from doing that. I mean, if you believe in your work, you can also be explicit about the assumptions behind it. All right, another pause here for questions.
Thank you, Rosien. That's a lot of information indeed. So I'm looking forward to the questions of the attendees. Is there any question? Now is the moment where you can ask your question writing in the chat or in the question and answer tool, or you can even raise your hand if you want to speak. Not yet. Very clear, they say. Okay, but maybe I can ask a question in the meantime, because you know most of the awardees are organizations working on different projects. So what would you recommend? Would you recommend to have a theory of change for a project within the organization, or an overall theory of change for the whole organization?
I think it's obviously that is a decision that the organization has to take itself. I think if you are launching a new thing, which is very specific, I would definitely recommend before you start it to sort of map the theory of change behind it, because that will allow you to track what's going on. At the same time, if you're an organization who has been doing for 5, 6, 7, maybe even 10 years certain things, and you haven't had the benefit of some sort of an evaluation process, again, I would, in that case, I would take everything that you're doing and see if you can reconstruct the theory of change behind what you've been doing over the past years, because that helps you to reflect and to strategize also towards the future. So it really depends on where you are and what your concern is as an organization. If you're happy with the entire thing, but you want to find out something which is very specific for a new project that you want to start or something, then do it at that more detailed level.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? Or
yeah, sure. Yes, it answered it. It's very clear. Thank you. It just brings me to another point, if I may. I see that there are no other questions, so maybe I can continue with the second question from my side. So you say that if we want to be more specific, we can do a theory of change for a project rather than the organization. But especially in case we do a theory of change for the organization, there might be, well, I'm sure there are many answers to each of your points. So to the what, to the when, to the how. There's not only one answer to that. So it might become a very complex theory of change, a complex image.
Yeah. I think. And I think that's also very important for you to reflect on. If you are a very small organization and you are undertaking a lot of different things for a lot of different groups at individual level, at system level, then you find in the process of developing the theory of change, or extracting basically the theory of change from what you're doing, then you will probably need to reflect on whether you are prioritizing enough. Maybe you need to drop certain lines of work because they may or be more focused in your work. So in that sense, if it turns out that your TOC tends to be incredibly complicated and you're a relatively small organization, that's food for thought.
Mm-hmm. Okay, must be revised maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
prioritized, as you said. So someone from the attendees is asking in what way and at what point we can adapt the theory of change. I think it refers to the point made before on the organization level, project level, and yeah.
Yeah, I think if you have there's two reasons that you can change your theory of change, or two groups of reasons. They can be external reasons or internal reasons. If your context is changing dramatically, that will be a trigger for you to reflect on: is my theory, are my assumptions still correct? Will my theory still work? Alternatively, you can be collecting data and that help you test your assumptions and prove your assumptions wrong. So that means that you would have to adapt your theory. So those are the main reasons that you would want, or moments that you would want to change your theory.
Okay. Thank you. I think it's very clear. I got the answers to questions. I believe we can move on. There are no more questions, and of course there will be another pause at the end where all attendees can ask more questions if they wish. Thank you,
Okay.
Rosien.
Okay, so this is where we move into what does it look like. Obviously, you can have a very complicated theory of change if you have a very complicated operation, but we always recommend to focus on priorities. So if certain, don't try and include all the details, yet try to be as specific as possible. Again, as I said, try and involve your stakeholders and the learnings of your stakeholders. A theory of change ideally includes a written statement, but it's often also very useful to have some sort of a graphic or map to represent it. There's two reasons for that. First of all, developing a graphic or a map can help you again focus and learn about the connections and how your work is connected with what you try to achieve. And it's also good if you want to present and communicate about your work. And as I mentioned already, if you have a logic model, then the theory of change will be sort of a complement to it. The written statement should include an overall outcome or impact statement, the activities, who's involved, who's to be influenced, and the assumptions. That's the written statement. And the map could be something like this. Like if you read this from left to right, you have on the left the overall impact statement, what, who, and where. Then you have a series of intermediate objectives or outcomes, and these are linked with the activities. And between the activities, the intermediate objectives, and the ultimate objective, this is where you have all the assumptions and the behavior changes that you try to achieve. And again, so your impact statement, besides the written one, could have some sort of a graphic representation. Not necessarily exactly like this. I can try and find if I can send you a series of examples, but they have a variety. There's very different ways, and you can be very creative in visually presenting your theory of change. This is an important recommendation. Don't aim to be perfect or complete, for that matter. It's really an exercise that should help you be deliberate about what you do and be aware of the assumptions of that you are making. It's not about creating the perfect map or getting it right. It's an iterative process. Already said that if the situation around you changes, you will probably need to review your theory of change. So if you want to use your theory of change, everything that we said until now, the visual representation, the written statement can be used, for example, for communication if you want to communicate to your donors, but also to your to other stakeholders. You can find a way to communicate to your constituents. But if you want to use it for monitoring and evaluation, you need indicators that help you identify whether something has been realized or not. They have to be concrete, and an indicator needs a data source. Again, if I go back to the example of this webinar, the indicator can be people. As a result of this webinar, people start using and developing a DOC for their work. That is concrete. I mean, either you do it or you don't. But I need a data source, and a possibility could be that I don't know. We send around somewhere in the course of this of the next few months, we send out an email and ask you, did you participate in the webinar, and are you going to use it, and are you doing something? So that will be the data source. And for all these elements, so and now we work from right to left. It's very easy to establish whether an activity took place. The webinar has been conducted or not. We know from the data whether or not there have been participants. Who is participant? We even know probably whether they attended the entire webinar or bailed out halfway at this stage. The behavior change, are you going to develop a TOC or not? That's already, it's quite concrete, and it's reasonably easy to find a data source. Obviously, we want you to develop the TOC because we think that you will be better positioned to monitor your work. That's the intermediate objective that we have by doing this webinar. That's already a little bit more complicated to find an indicator for and to establish, let alone, which is the ultimate objective of doing all this, is that your work is going to be more effective. So it's not simple to develop indicators, but it's a very important exercise to have good indicators. I personally find, and I've been working with civil society organizations for many years, and we normally have very big goals. We want to change the world, and if we don't establish clear indicators for the little steps that we are making, sometimes people get frustrated. So it's really important to try and find good indicators from the right side to the left. So you can also see what you actually get accomplished. Indicators have to be smart or spiced. There's been a lot of emphasis always on smart indicators, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant and time-bound. I find that in some of the work that we do, you then get, very, very silly indicators, simply because they have to be smart. And they're not necessarily good indicators. So there's been some sort of a counter movement saying, oh no, they don't, forget about smart, let them be spiced. Subjective, participatory, interpreted, cross-checked, empowering, and diverse. We shouldn't go into details, but don't get carried away with numbers. I'm not sure who said it, but somebody says that not everything that can be measured counts, and not everything that can be measured actually counts, and not everything that counts can be really measured. So try and not get carried away with the numbers, but at the same time, it's important to be concrete. Let's forget about this slide. This is the details of the logic model, but it's basically, it's good if you want to connect the two. But the logic model tend to be much more specific. In a logic model, you also talk very much about the inputs, which in the DOC we don't emphasize that much, all the inputs. Let's go for some questions.
Okay, thank you, Rosien. Yeah, again, if you're not familiar with the theory of change and monitoring evaluation, I think there's quite a lot to learn. And from your presentation, there are also many inputs and many concepts to digest, I would say, and I think the practice is very important. I think once our Ds are going to develop a theory of change, probably all the concepts that you explained will become much more concrete and tangible, and I'm sure that in the end it will be much easier than we think to develop a theory of change. But let's move on for some questions. We have 15 minutes. So we can still have questions. Is there another part, Rosien, of your presentation after that?
Wait a second. I think no, we will have some concrete steps on how we can move how we can use this in the development of the.
Okay. So there is make your own. Okay. Yeah. So maybe we can have still 5 minutes for questions, 10 minutes if necessary, and then we move on for the step by step, and which is, I believe, your last slide.
Yes.
So please go ahead, ask your questions using the chat or the Q&A tool. In the meantime, maybe I can ask Rosien a question on the indicators, because I always find this a bit. Yeah, I always struggle with the indicators, especially when it comes to projects on, for instance, dementia-friendly communities, on more specific on activities to include people living with dementia, to empower people living with dementia and their carers in the community. How can you measure the impact of the activities? So for instance, the empowerment and the involvement of people living with dementia, if there are no indicators. Does it mean that we cannot develop a theory of change, or does it mean that if we don't have specific indicators, it's better not to use a theory of change? Or what do you recommend?
No, I think it's extremely important to use the theory of change and try to develop indicators. But this is where, for me, the spiced indicators come in. For example, when it comes to inclusion of people living with dementia, as an organization, you want to involve people living with dementia in defining what that inclusion is in your specific community. What are the what are indicators of inclusion? That's not only very important for you to monitor the progress and the effectiveness of your work, but it's also a very empowering exercise for your constituents. So I think that as an NGO or as a professional or a volunteer, you might find it difficult to define what inclusion, what would be an indicator of inclusion. But once you sit down with caregivers and with people living with dementia, you will find that they can identify for you indicators, and that can be very, very helpful for your work. So yes, it isn't easy, and it's not as simple as what should I say? You know, counting the number of bean seedlings that sprouted, which can be very measurable, but doesn't really count. While working on what is an indicator for inclusiveness can definitely be. But the important is that you should balance in the map. You should try and find indicators for the different steps. So in part, you need indicators of inclusiveness, but then you need to reason back. So what does it need to change? People in institutions may healthcare providers may need to change their behavior. People living with dementia may need to change certain behaviors. So you need to map this whole change process and the theory you have about this change process to be able to track the progress and the activities.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's very useful. I think most of the organizations, the awardees are facing this dilemma, I would say. And we have another question in the chat. They're asking that most things that have to do with the quality monitoring and evaluation are resisted by staff and managers. Because they believe they are controlling or part of a very bureaucratic system.
Yeah.
So in your experience, how might this resistance be overcome?
Yeah. Okay, what I find very important, a lot of this control perception has to do if you limit the monitoring to this right side, like behind these activities are inputs, resources, and then you need to continuously report on all your activities and what has been done and how it's been done and how much resources have been used, and you can have a very elaborate control process about this. And then still don't know whatever outcomes you are generating. Then sometimes you have these evaluations and they go about this very left side. So this external person is coming and checking whether or not you've changed the world, which can also be very frustrating. The nice part about having a theory of change and trying to work through this exercise is that you make the connections, and you can see the progress that you are making in this middle part. So yes, people started using my information service. Maybe I have 20 people using my information service, and then 5 of them actually change something in their behavior, which is not necessarily that bad. You cannot expect that, but it's so you get the steps and you get a little bit of an overview. So no, don't don't stick to the controlling in all the details of the activities and everything, but use this exercise to make a connection between the big faraway goals that you have and all the intermediate goals, and try and make visible all the intermediate goals and changes that are happening.
Okay. Thank you. I think we don't have more questions at the moment, so maybe we can move on for the last part of the presentation, and then I would like also to clarify some points in terms of follow-up of this webinar, because some people are asking if there will be an abstract of this presentation. For sure, we will make available the slides, so we will send this to all of you, but I would like to conclude the webinar with more practical information, also referring to the abstract and the next steps. So please, Rosien, go ahead.
Okay, well, if you're interested in developing a TOC, please let us know. Emma, who's not here in this webinar because she is ill, but she's leading the project, so email her and tell her you're interested in developing a TOC. We think that it's to be recommended that you do the work with a small team, like 2 or 3 people is enough. But what is important that you surround yourself with a sounding board. So that you don't do it in isolation, but you sort of refer to your sounding board every once in a while. The presentations and the questions are to be reviewed, and then plan for yourself how you want to address and look for answers to these questions. We are currently developing some worksheets that we can provide to you. If you email Emma, we will provide you with these worksheets, and you can get support from us on an individual basis. We can be part of your sounding board, so to speak. We would hope that we can use some of the TOCs that you work and that you develop in this September workshop. In that case, they should be ready by 26 July. So that would be, I think, my presentation. And again, we can provide you with support. I was looking in the chat that there could be language issues. Emma is fluent in French. I unfortunately I don't speak Italian, so I can't help there. I can do Spanish and I can do Dutch, and I'm okay with German as long as I don't have to speak it, but I can definitely read it. So we'll try and accommodate you to the extent possible.
Okay. Thank you, Rosien. You have
All
any
right.
other point?
No. I was only thinking this one thing about the September workshop. Maybe we need to explain that. So we are for the September workshop. We're still looking to see who will be invited to participate. Even if you don't want to participate in that workshop, you can still work on a TOC. I mean, there's no direct connection, and we will definitely support you also if you do not participate in the workshop. And the other way around, you can be invited to do the September workshop, but not work on a TOC.
Yeah. Thank you, Rosien. Indeed, I wanted to clarify this point on the next steps and how we proceed from now on in co-creating the quality framework, and what are the next steps for the awardees. So first of all, as Rosien said, there will be some clinics, we call them, so one-to-one support and also online conversations. So Emma and Rosien can provide you with help and support in developing your theory of change if it's needed. So you can contact them anytime in the next days or weeks, so to make sure that they are aware that you are interested. So if you don't if you don't express your interest, we cannot know if you really want to develop a theory of change, if you want to participate in the co-development of the quality framework. So please raise your voice and contact Emma and Rosien. Also, as Rosien said, if you want to participate in the workshop in Brussels on the 23rd and 24th of September, it's desirable that you develop a theory of change, but this is not a requirement. The registration for this workshop is still open and the deadline is tomorrow. So you have the link to register in one of the emails that I've sent you previously. I can send it again as a follow-up of this webinar. So I will send you another email with the link. So please register. As you know, the workshop is limited to 10 awardees. So we will need to select the awardees based on the geographical spread, on the experience, and on monitoring and evaluation. So there are some criteria to select the awardees that will be taking part to the workshop in September. On a side note, EFID will reimburse your travel and accommodation, so you don't have to invest too much on this, but of course time, it's also a big investment, and we know it, so we will make sure that that will be as much as useful as possible for your organization. Concerning this webinar, as I said, it's recorded, so we are recording it. So we will make it available in case you want to watch it later, and also for those awardees who couldn't join us today. So I will send you the link with the recording of the webinar. So maybe you can also go through the slides a bit slowly at your own pace, and you can listen to it again. And of course, we have the PowerPoint, which will be available, and we will send it to you by email. Yeah, is there any other question related to the presentation of Rosien or to the next steps in the process of the development of theory of change or overall process of developing a quality framework? Not that I know. So far, everything is clear. That's great.
All right.
Okay.
Well, looking forward to hear from you, and talk to you next time.
Perfect. Thank you, Rosien. I see that it's almost 1 o'clock here in Brussels, so perfect timing. And anyway, if you have any questions, even after watching again the recording of the webinar or the slides that will be sent, don't hesitate to contact Emma and Rosien. So thank you very much. Thank you, Rosien, and thank you all for attending this webinar.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.